Have you ever thought, I don't know how I would survive if this or that ever happened? Well, here's how. These are the stories of how people just like you and I have gone through difficult life events and survived. It's a journey of faith, hope, and yes, the power of love. Here is the survival guide for the non-survivor. Well, welcome back to another edition of Survival Guide. I'm Greg Fish, your host, and this has been an incredible journey because I've gotten to talk with some very special people who have some very powerful stories. We're looking at stories that can help you survive because sometimes survival is just a day-at-a-time thing. I realize for my own survival, I don't know how I did it. I just found myself waking up in the morning and breathing, and so I chose to survive. And I love these stories of other folks who've found ways to do the same thing. And today, a guest who actually I go way back with, despite the fact that I haven't seen her for years. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I may have given you your first job in radio. Kelly Trask is here with us. Goes all the way back to my radio days. And Kelly was became the wife of the man who was my general manager in radio, Blair Trask, who was just one of these special people in this world. He was a character. He was magnetic. He could draw people in like few people I've seen in this world. He had a way with people that I was just very envious of. And through this life, he influenced and touched a lot of people. But tragically, in 2018, Blair passed away. So Kelly, how many years were you married to the point that Blair passed away?
Yeah, we were married 17 years.
And by the way, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you. I've been looking forward to this interview, Kelly.
Yes.
Blair passed away in 2018. And I made note to you beforehand that I couldn't believe how long it has been since he died. And that's a good example of what people from the outside see, because it just seems like it was yesterday. For me, it was around Thanksgiving time, correct?
It was actually Thanksgiving Day.
Thanksgiving Day. I have a vague remembrance of a friend sending me a text saying, hey, did you hear about Blair on Thanksgiving Day? And wow, that was just such a shocker. But it just seems like yesterday to me, but yet you've lived through it. And now here 5 years, coming on 5 years later, isn't it interesting how when people are watching from the outside, they don't realize always how much time has passed. And do you find that a lot with people who's wasn't it just yesterday that he died?
Yeah, it does. At times, a funny thing. For 1 minute, it seems like it was 50 years ago, and sometimes it seems like it was yesterday. So it just kind of depends on the moment, and even that interpretation or reflection has changed since that day. So it is. I'll still run across people. In fact, ironically, I was headed Wednesday to speak at a widows event in Louisville, and someone called me on the phone who I didn't know, and actually he mentioned that he was one of. There was a reason we needed to talk, but he said, "Oh, by the way, I just want you to know, I had Blair as a student in college, and he was one of my favorite students, and he had all these stories to tell me." And that was such a odd timing as I was headed to this event, but it was also very warming because I got to hear in someone else's stories about how Blair impacted them. And I'm going to tell you, Blair, there's no shortage of those that I have learned over the years.
Well, and Blair and I had the privilege of the wild ride of going country in the 90s, which was the country boom. And I think that may have been one of the best times ever to be in country radio, just because it was just so out there. And so it was a really neat thing. And I remember Blair telling me, so here's a little trivia question. I want to see if I know something about him you don't know. Do you know the name of the song that turned Blair onto country music? He was not a country fan, but do you know the song that turned Blair to a country fan?
Oh, I'm going to be embarrassed that I don't know this. I'm going to assume it was a Merle Haggard song, but I don't know.
Believe it or not, it was a Charlie Pride song, Burgers and Fries.
Yep, Burgers and Fries. Yep. Okay, yeah. He did love that song. I didn't know the context why, but there you go.
Okay, so now the song that I remember he loved the most through the country years that I knew him was "I'm No Stranger to the Rain," which really, it was interesting how a man who always seemed to have it so together and be so on top of things had this undercurrent of tragedy in his own life and of heartache. And it was just always there. You could tell it, but his confidence belied it. So before we go there, tell me a little bit about your marriage with Blair and your family.
Oh, wow. Well, we worked together. We always worked together. Even all throughout our marriage, we did. And I always said he had his dancing space and I had mine. We knew what each other did. He probably knew more about what I did than I thought he did, but he would handle like the engineering and the day-to-day. And we always discussed basically big decisions, the moving forward of how we saw our vision with the company and so forth. And then, of course, children are involved. So Blair had a son. He's older, a little bit older. And then we had our two children together. And then there was some grandkids and some different things. So there was just never a moment where I always said, I don't know why we owned couches. We never used them. We were always doing a project together. We were always planning something. Blair didn't sit still and neither did I. So we worked really well together. It was a good team. I supported him. He supported me. And I think one of the biggest milestone or successes in our marriage, and there was a lot I could look back on, but we loved growing things together, and we just had a mutual respect for each other on how we did that.
I know Blair was quite a workaholic in the day that I knew him. Did he continue with that path, and was that something that you had to work through with him?
It's kind of funny. He did tell me that he used to be a workaholic, and I said, I don't see it. And I did see it in the fact that his mind was always working. But we had some pretty good traditions. I mean, he would come home in the evenings, by 5 or 6 o'clock most of the time. And we went on several trips throughout the year, little vacations, nothing crazy, but he always made time that we had time together. And we very much had a home life as well as a work life. And he told me once, he said, the old me didn't do it this way. And he said, but I found life is so much more enjoyable when we do. And so that is something that I didn't really get to know about him, but yet I got to experience, I guess, the slowed down version. But I will say the man's brain never slowed down. So.
And I wonder to what extent his workaholic lifestyle was to hide the pain that he was struggling with. And then having you in his life finally gave him family and gave him that thing that he really longed for. And probably I didn't realize how strongly he was longing for that because, again, he was always such a strong, in control he was the kind of guy, I don't know if he always did this, but I remember when I knew him, he didn't want anesthesia at the dentist office. He wanted to just face it like it was. And that really spoke to me about the man that I knew as Blair, that he was strong, tough, and just trudged straight ahead.
Yeah, we very much had a big family component to our life.
That's awesome.
And I don't really know him as you knew him prior.
Right.
But yeah, we very much had a tight family connection and a tight marriage connection too, which was good.
And just so the folks understand the time frame here, the last time I actually saw Blair was in 2000 when I left radio to go into the full-time ministry. And so even though I consider him one of the dear friends of my life, I really had been out of touch with him. I spoke with him one time, I think within the year or so before he passed, if I'm not mistaken, but really had been out of touch with Blair for a number of years and still just have such a fond memory of him that I consider him one of the dear people of my life. So just briefly, your two kids, their ages these days?
So my youngest is 15 and my oldest is 17. And they were 10 and 12 when he passed away. And then, Blair's older son too, Torian. So he, he's a little over 40. I don't want to give his age. So he might cancel me. I don't know.
You've done, yeah. So let's go then to what happened on Thanksgiving Day of 2018. Can you just give us the story as to what happened that day?
Basically, I woke up to what I didn't realize at the time, but I woke up to him having a heart attack. I didn't realize that's what was happening at the time. So I'll spare you a lot of the details and things along those lines. were not able to, they got him stable when he left here, but he did pass away at the hospital. So in fact, when they left here, when the ambulance left, they said, we have hope, get your kids, get your things, meet us at the hospital, that sort of thing. So I grabbed things I knew he would love and would want to have when he woke up. And I had no idea. I mean, I knew something terrible had happened. Even at the time, I wasn't sure what had happened. But by the time I got there, he had already passed away. So I didn't get to, talk to him. We didn't really talk much that morning. It was more just getting up and getting into action. So, I didn't realize that what I was witnessing was that, administered CPR until paramedics got there. I mean, I'm on the phone with 911. They're telling me what to do. But yeah, so that's kind of how that morning unfolded.
Now, Blair was 60. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, he was 60.
And he had, and I didn't know this about Blair, but I know you shared with me at some point along the line that he had a heart condition that he was concerned about.
Yeah, he had a heart doctor, and he had some heart things he was, looking at. Ironically, he had just been to his heart doctor, who, basically said he was having some symptoms of some things, and he had basically had been in the. Of course, he died on Thanksgiving, but he had been to see her in November, and I think there was some thoughts on her part that he just needed, some new sleep apnea tests. So they got those scheduled, and basically said, you're fine. All these symptoms are related to sleep apnea, not your heart. And, fast forward, and that was sadly not the case.
Wow. So something that was kind of missed in him that was going on. And so as you look back on that day, sometimes we see special things that at the time may have gone by meaninglessly, but after a death, all of a sudden they have special meaning. Were there any things that happened in the days leading up to this that you still to this day look back on and are thankful for that special connection or perhaps special show of love or something in that line?
You mean the time before or the day?
Yeah, in the days before he passed.
Yeah. The night before. The night before, well, I'd say a few days before he passed away, we had this crazy ice storm here in the area, and we had just bought a house out of foreclosure. It had just been about at the year mark. And so we didn't have a lot of cool toys or anything to take care of the tree limbs and that kind of stuff. We hadn't gone down those roads yet. So the ice storm made it real clear that we needed some things. So we actually spent the day before cleaning up limbs and hauling stuff down and getting rid of debris that had been, tree limbs and branches and that kind of stuff. And so we actually worked, we both stayed, we worked for a little while that day, but we spent most of the day all together as a family cleaning this stuff up. And the night before, and I always feel like this was a God moment in reflection, but the night before we had such an awesome night. I mean, we actually went to dinner, we went to the movies, with the kids. And then we were having such a great time. We decided to all go Christmas shopping. And it was just such a fun night. I mean, even my kids didn't fight. So my kids were 10 and 12 at the time. So that had to be a God thing right there.
Sure.
Everybody got along. There wasn't any bickering. It was just so much fun. We just had the best night. And I'm so grateful for that because I remember that night very detailed.
Wow. Had you had conversations with Blair about death or life after him? Had that ever been a point of conversation?
I don't know that we ever really, I mean, in some planning things, but I don't know that I wouldn't entertain it. Even if he ever brought it up, I would say, that's not going to happen because you're going to be around forever. So I'm not going to worry about it. So, some of the flippant things you say, I would say nothing truly in depth to where I knew exactly all the things that would have had to have taken place. But, I think it's no matter whatever would have been planned in those moments, things don't go as planned anyway.
Wow. So then the days after, tell me about the community that came together to support you and your family.
Yeah, I was real blessed to have a big community. Of course, Blair and I we worked together. So Obviously, there was a staff community and fellow employees and so forth that we had worked with. Um, and I think that there were a lot of questions initially about, okay, who's going to be doing what next? I mean, Blair filled a lot of shoes, professionally speaking, as well as personally. And so there's that practical application of, oh my gosh, how is all this stuff over here going to get done? Fortunately, most all of the staff that we have worked with have been there a long time. And I will say, I'm sure it wasn't magically, but everybody kind of ended up absorbing some different pieces of what he did. There were some components that I still to this day have a hard time piecing together to make up his brain. But there was that side of the, community, if you will. Then there was the family side that definitely came to be supportive. And then the friend network, my kids' friends, their families, their friends' families. So we had a lot of support on every single layer of the journey.
Perhaps one important thing for the folks to know about Blair too is how multifaceted his gifting was in the area radio. I mean, he had the best radio voice a person could want, and personality to go with it. There's one thing to have a voice, one thing to have a personality, but to have both, he really had the full package and was just a really gifted on-air talent. And so not only was he still doing on-air work?
Oh yeah, he still had a morning show. He was doing a morning show every day. And something needed wired, he fixed it, that sort of thing. Of course we have our engineer, still work with him. I say this, I recently did an ebook, but in that ebook, I wrote that Blair could make sound come out of an empty chip bag. I mean, he could literally take anything and make it into a radio. And that was a tribute to, I think, how his brain worked. But I kind of tell you a little funny story. I don't want to get off your topics too much.
No, go right ahead. I would love to hear it.
I guess the weekend after he passed away, he was supposed to have wired a receiver to get some high school sports more automated. And I don't remember the details as to why my engineer couldn't do that project. I just remember that a game was coming up and it had to be done. And this was my first go at trying to figure out, dealing with 4-wire audio and stripping it out. And we used a punch block system in our FM studio. And a punch block system means when you strip the wires out and each wire goes into an individual, let's just say an individual place, if you will, and has to be crimped back together with a special tool. And so my engineer said, you have to find a punch block tool. Blair would have had at least 2 of them, and they were only used here. So he would have had it. And so this was probably a couple weeks after he died, maybe 2 or 3 weeks by the time we were able to get to it. And I remember, couldn't find it to save my life. Blair, we had a toolbox in our office. We had a shared office. I had one side of the desk, he had the other. And I went to go look in that toolbox. It wasn't there. I looked in the toolboxes in the closet, not there. I go look in his truck, not there. And I remember one Sunday morning, I dropped the kids off to church. And I was obsessed with trying to find this thing. And it's kind of funny how you get somewhat hyper-focused on something in grief. But I dropped the kids off. I drove to the office. And by this time, I was so frustrated. I had spent several days looking for this thing, couldn't find it. Probably didn't think, well, I don't know why I didn't order one on Amazon or something like that at the time, but I didn't think that way. I'm like, he's got it somewhere. So I walk into our office, I flip the light on, and I said, okay, either Jesus or Blair, one of you has to find this punch block tool for me because I can't go any further in life until I have this thing. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you that I walked over to that silly toolbox that I had out 17 times, flip open the lid, and there it's laying right on top. And I just had that moment where I was like sad because of there it was and all this time I had spent trying to find it and I was so focused on it. But then it also dawned on me, I thought, wait a minute, did I just burn up one of my things? Do I get more of these? Did I waste it on a punch block tool? And I was like, hold on a second, I don't need it that bad. But it's funny. I've never had a moment like that since, nor have I never been demanding of Jesus or Blair.
And that almost sounds like a country song. That's a great title, Jesus or Blair.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one of you has to help me here. So that's what I needed.
You brought to mind, and I just give this to you briefly, one of my favorite stories with Blair, and to show how multifaceted he was. He was doing some soldering in one of the studios, and I was back having a conversation with him when the solder dripped on his silk tie and ruined the tie. And he was frustrated. He started taking off, and I said, "Hey, you want to have some fun?" Sure, he was always up for that.
Yeah.
And, Blair and I were known to butt heads from time to time. And so it wasn't an uncommon thing, but we staged this, that we walked out where we knew everybody would be and started this terrible fight with each other, just yelling at each other. And of course, everybody came out of their corners to watch the fight. And at one point I said, "I've had it with you." And I grabbed a pair of scissors and cut off his tie. And everybody goes, and then we just started laughing, and they looked at us like, "Why are you laughing?" And it was just one of those great moments.
I will. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Okay. I love that story. Well, tell me about your book. This is great.
Yeah. So I was asked to speak last spring at a women's conference, and people would just in general conversation would come up to me and say, "How were you able to kind of hold on to this and move forward and do these things?" And I'm like, I guess I got thinking, I'm like, I really don't know, other than Jesus. I really don't know how that happened. But I thought it had to have happened through some kind of way. So I wrote this speech, and after I gave this speech, a woman approached me, and she was very much tearful. And she said, "Hey, is there any way I can get a copy of this speech for a family member?" And I was like, "Well, you can have this one." So I gave her the one I had. Someone else asked me for a copy, and fast forward a couple months later, someone else asked me one, and I thought, is there any way I can just get this into something that's downloadable? So that's what started that journey. And I connected with Cocoon to Wings Publishing Company, and they helped me create an ebook, which is titled "The Next Thing: Moving Forward Without a Map." And inside, I'm able to kind of lay out some general framework. Of course, it has a spiritual component to it, but a general framework of things that you can keep in mind when you're in the beginning or the middle or whatever season you're in of some kind of unplanned life change. And maybe it's the middle of grief. Maybe it's something that you weren't expecting your life to go a different trajectory. It's like, okay, wait a second, what happens next? And so being able to come up with the next thing versus how we tend to approach life, which is in to-do lists, where everything kind of goes on one page, and, that doesn't work in the middle of grief. And that is one thing I did realize. So I was able to kind of piece apart and compartmentalize and give some framework for how other people can move forward without a map. Because all of us are not given a blueprint for exactly what we're supposed to do next. And so hopefully I was able to.
And there are no books.
Yeah, there's zero books. Sorry to anybody who's ever written a book, but it's just not. There's things that will help. And so that's the heart behind this publication was The Next Thing: Moving Forward Without a Map.
And where is the book available?
Yeah, so you can go online at Amazon and you can download that on Kindle. It's also, I think, available at Barnes and Noble's download and iBooks. You can find it there too.
Very good. So grief can be different than what people expect of us. And I'm sure because I've been through this, everybody who's grieved a loss of a spouse has been through this. You've experienced people having higher expectations for your grief and your grief pattern. What was the surprising thing that you learned about grief that maybe you didn't understand before?
I did not realize the physical. I knew there would be, I guess I have grieved before. I'd lost loved ones, so I understood grief, to that capacity. I did not realize the physical grieving. And even to this day, 5 years later, something can just make you completely lose it. I will tell you, even the phone call I got Wednesday, I was like, wow, this is so ironic. This is like one of the first few times I've talked about this in public, and here someone's calling me on the way, telling me stories about Blair. I mean, I know that's a God thing, but it still caught me. But I will tell you that grief is not necessarily controllable. I remember right after he died, I couldn't have a conversation with anybody now without start crying. And I remember saying, just give me 30 seconds. I'll be okay. I'll get myself together. It was incontrollable. Crying was incontrollable. The physical pain of grief is just something I think people don't necessarily think about. I really truly believe that the broken heart syndrome is a real thing. I remember walking up the stairs one night thinking that I was having a heart attack. I was like, I am in so much pain. This is hurting. My chest hurts. I can't breathe. And I was like, wow, I wonder if this is what they're talking about, when they talk about this. And so I think the physical aspect of it, I also was secondary, and this is something I bring up in my book. For me, the mental aspect of it was I lost my ability to focus on a lot of things at once. I know a lot of people who obviously just listening to this don't know me, but I usually have a lot of balls in the air. I juggle a lot of projects at one time. I completely lost that ability to do that. I could only see one thing right in front of me. I tell the story in my in the ebook, but when I went to the grocery store, I couldn't take a big list and shop it. I don't know. It sounds like a common sense thing, but I could only focus on one thing at a time. I remember just going and sometimes getting just a couple things just to go back the very next day because I couldn't piece things together very well in that respect. So I think everything gets drawn in and all of a sudden you're here versus when you're in life and everything's kind of doing whatever. You might have a lot of projects going on, but in grief, you really just revert back to the core, and you can only focus on, I think for me, it was a very, very few things at a time, even though I had a lot of things screaming at me, because we owned radio stations together. We had children together, and we bought this. If you ever seen the movie, Money Pit with Tom Hanks, like the house in that movie where it hated you when you lived there. That was kind of what we were in. We didn't have water for several weeks. I mean, there was just things like that. The house had its own project too, and it was something we were supposed to do together. And but I will just tell you that those are probably the physical aspect, and then the mental. Because I assume people would get the emotional piece of it, but those are the two things that I probably didn't even know to think about, I guess, to be honest.
And in you saying that, I want to just kind of pause here and say something, because we've spent some time praising Blair and his memory, but I want to just say that I remember you as being one of the most remarkably talented radio people, that you seem to have a very natural gifting for it, if I remember correctly. And you were one of those folks that as a program director, I never had any problem trusting you at all. I was always relieved when things were in your hands, because you had a very remarkable gifting there. So I wanted to bring that out as well, just so folks would know that Blair was very blessed as a radio guy to have a natural talent like you in his life as well.
We did make a good team, I think.
So do you find, now that you look back over these 5 years, that there are signposts to wellness? That is, at this point, you felt like you could see that you had made a step forward?
I think, I guess looking back on it, there's different seasons of it. I think there was maybe some different realizations maybe along the way that I can look back now and go, that was getting through that, not realizing it. I will say that from a God perspective, I will say that there were little things that I think he would allow to happen that would bring me little bits of comfort that I knew could only come from him. That I could look back on and go, okay, that moment had to be, a God moment. But one of those, for example, I decided to take the day off on the anniversary of the first year he passed away. And I have to say, I hadn't gone through the funeral things yet, and they were still in a big box. And I decided to sit down that day and make a scrapbook and just go through and feel all those things that I really didn't have a lot of time in the very beginning to kind of feel and wade through. And I can't explain how this happened. In a sea of, sympathy cards and pictures and the guest book from the funeral and just different notes and things like that. I mean, there was a lot. I found a birthday card he had wrote me. And I thought, how did a birthday card get in this? And, I can just tell you so many little stories like that. Fast forward to our anniversary time, which is in May, and fast forward to that. And my daughter was needing something for school. And I'm looking for something in a place. I needed a picture. And I'm like, oh, where would I have stashed that photo? And for some reason, I go to this box that's in our, in our basement, and I open it up. And I saw a letter that was taped closed in an envelope, and it said time capsule, not to be opened until 2021. And I was like, then I remembered he and I had done this years ago. Do you think I waited to 2021? I ripped that thing open right there, and just read it. So I guess looking back, I don't know that I answered your question technically, but I guess looking back, I see little pieces of where I had little reminders and things. As far as I will address like the wellness piece of it, I don't ever know that there's like a light switch moment where we go, okay, I'm good. I don't think in life that we ever, I think we just learn how to do the next thing and take the next step and just keep moving forward. So I think there's some reflections generally like that. But I think that kind of speaks to who he was to kind of say that there will always be, that missing piece in that respect. But I think that again, just kind of goes to who he was. But yeah, that there was a lot of, little reminders along the way, but there's been a lot of good people. God always said God placed the right people around us, which I think helped.
I think one thing that people struggle with more from the outside looking in than they do but we struggle with this in loss, and that is the moving forward. Mm-hmm. It's not moving on, it's moving forward. And how has your experience been both honoring and loving and grieving Blair, but also recognizing now Kelly has a life to live and I've got to keep living. Yeah. How has that been for you?
Yeah. So there's a lot of answers to that question. There's the professional answer. Everything I did in the beginning around work was, would Blair do it this way? Oh my gosh, he probably wouldn't. I need to reframe it. How would Blair think about this decision? Everything in the beginning, and I don't remember how long that took, but was always with that framework. And I had a discussion with someone and, the point was made. It is sad, but he is not here. And you're going to have to make decisions professionally that work for your new environment and work with the people that you have to work with that may or may not been what he decided, because that variable is not there to work with those things. So if that makes sense. So I think in the beginning I had to learn, and the beginning might be like a year into it, right? But I had to learn to let go of guilt with making decisions that without knowing 100% if he would be behind them or not. Of course, I always wanted to make things honoring of his memory, decisions honoring his memory, but I had to move forward with different pieces because he wasn't there. And he filled a lot of shoes. And so it took a lot of shoes to fill his one pair. And so I think that answers that on the professional side. I had to let go of guilt that I wasn't doing things maybe his way anymore. I had to just go, I think he would be okay with any way, because that's just, what I had to work with. And with the moving forward piece, with kids, it was different too. We had to, even though that I've been their mom since the beginning, when you have four of you, you have a different personality to bounce things off of, or question of parenting. And all of a sudden you are both parents, and all of a sudden your relationship changes a little bit. Not that you're not the mom, but you're also the dad, and you're also, or you're trying to fulfill that role best you can. And I think that kids don't, this is one everything I learned, sidetrack, but kids don't grieve like adults. I don't care what book is out there. They don't grieve in the linear passages. It's not like you go from this to this to this to this to this. Sometimes you might go over here to come back to do this, to do that. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to it. And so I think for me, it's in your own grief, but then also recognizing, kids and where they're grieving. And then I think there's something called a secondary grief. I don't know if that's a real term, but where you're grieving for your own primary loss, but then I probably think that this happens for me now, is that you tend to grieve about what each other is missing, what the kids are missing. I remember one of my kids was playing sports at the time, and I went to the game and there wasn't the dad there, and so I think then you go through phases of where you grieve that, where you grieve of what Blair doesn't get to see now and what they don't get to experience. And kids, they were 10 and 12 and they're 15 and 17. And in that 5 years, they've grown as people. So yeah, there's probably that, those levels too, that you kind of have as you go along, that I don't think you ever check the box that you're completely out of the woods, so to speak. I think you're always grieving on some kind of level, but yes, you move forward, and you give yourself a lot of grace, and to be able to look messy, and that's okay, because it is messy. Even now, I even now, if someone catches me and we have a conversation, I get teary eyed. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. No, I'm not, because it is a very traumatic thing. So I think just having that grace piece is huge, and that I do have those reflections in my ebook. And also just, talking about that. Another big mantra that I've used then and now is any decision that we made, nothing was forever. It was just for right now. I learned that.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, that kind of came to my mind, and I started using that as, wait a second, I'm not marrying any of these decisions. And I think once I took that pressure off myself, like, I don't have to decide the world today. It doesn't have to all be done right now. I can just do it in small doses. And guess what? If I don't like it, I got to be the boss of it, and I can change it later. And if it's not working for us, we'll go back to the drawing board. So once I started giving that to my kids and saying, hey guys, it's not forever, it's just for right now. And this is what we're functioning in right now. And I don't mean to be all over the board, but one other thing that I remember telling my kids is when Blair passed away, they missed school for the funeral, but I think they wanted to go back. I think they needed some structure and some normalcy. And one thing I told them, I said, hey, you don't have to grieve all in a package right now. You may decide a month from now that you need a day. You may decide 3 months from now you need a day. So let's just do this. You have this time available to you, and you spend it, and you can bank it, and you can do whatever. So if you tell me in a month from now, Mom, I really need to take this day off school, and I just need to have a down day and, reflect and do whatever, guess what? You're going to have that. You don't have to justify it to me. Now, if it's every day, we know we've got something else to maybe talk about, but if you need that time. And I remember the kids, so we just started doing that every semester. They knew they had days that if they just weren't feeling it, or I call them kind of mental health days that, you would give your own family, because adults take them.
Mm-hmm.
So we needed to give them, I wanted to give them to them. And, and it was a long time before each kid, but they each used them in their own respect for whatever they needed it for at the time.
It's really neat, and I think a very smart thing to do. So, Kelly, on a very personal level, how do you get up in the mornings? What's it like for you to get up and take in that breath of life and step into the fresh mercies God provides and to live? How does that work for you? What is your keep moving plan?
Yeah, keep moving plan is, in the beginning, it was like you mentioned before we started this recording today, was, gosh, in the middle of all that intense grief and physical pain and trauma, you're just getting out of bed and breathing. And you felt like that was the win for the day. That was the next thing. I started doing away with to-do lists and started going into next thing lists, if you will, just doing the next thing. I didn't have to have everything planned out. I still don't have to have anything planned out anymore. I really took that pressure off of having to have every single thing answered. And I think it's recognizing what a gift life is, and a person that, and I know, gosh, I struggled with this too, but, staying under the covers or not living isn't, or not even bringing, the memory of the person that you lost to life in different ways, wasn't going to serve God, wasn't going to serve kids, wasn't going to serve people I worked with. It was a matter of, okay, this has to be done. And how can I best doing it in the honoring of all these people that mean so much to me? And I won't say that, I just probably don't know that I thought about it too much, other than I didn't let myself stay in bed. I let myself grieve, but I had my own pockets of that. Sometimes it was in a parking lot before I'd walk in somewhere and I just have a meltdown, or sometimes it was at the grocery store in the Twinkie aisle. Blair loved Twinkies, and gosh, in the beginning I had to have someone grocery shop for me because I'd go past Hostess, and that was a trigger. So I think now it's just been, I have somewhat looked for ways to be honoring to his memory, and also realizing that the children and the family that we have, keeping his memory alive. We created a Blair Trask Memorial Broadcasting Scholarship. We, of course, dedicated FM studio to him. I feel like this ebook is another way to keep his memory out there too for the kids. So looking for ways that continue to honor his memory and keep his memory alive because he was such a vibrant person. But just realizing that we had such a gift when we were together, and being able to try to have that instill in our kids and a family that we had together from coming together and moving forward in that respect.
So one of the ideas behind this podcast is telling these stories so that people who think they cannot survive realize that they can, because I've found that in myself. People say, Greg, you're so strong for what you've been through. And I'm not strong. I just get up every day, keep breathing and keep moving.
Yeah.
What, if you could kind of look into the eyes metaphorically here of our listeners and viewers, and for somebody who's struggling with the loss of a spouse right now and thinking that Kelly seems so strong, I don't think I can do what she did. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I'd say I wasn't. I didn't have any magic answers either. I guess I would go back, and these are some kind of the points that I reflect in the ebook and with kind of the heart behind why I put it together, but about realizing that making decisions don't have to be forever. They can just be for right now. Giving yourself a lot of grace that you don't have to have it all together. It's going to look messy to others because it is, and it should. And that's not going to change. And then I also address some specific frameworks that you can apply. Number one being one of those, I won't bore you with all of them, but that basically you have to look up to receive help. I had a very much a spiritual component to my surviving that. And I would say that I had to be okay with asking for help. In the beginning, I would say, no, we're good. We don't need anything. And then I started realizing, wait a second, we're not good. And we do need some help. So anybody that wanted to help in any way that they offered, I just started letting them. And I realized that I, wasn't an island. I didn't have to do everything by myself, that would have just been another layer of pride that wouldn't have been productive. And so when people offer to help, let them. That's definitely one big component. But that you have to also, you can't walk around with your hands in your pockets, right? You have to be able to receive the help and also be willing to help yourself in some respects too. What does that look like? It doesn't have to look like a lot. It can just look like something small, that you took a shower that day, or, that you just functioned. I always said, like, in the beginning, it's changing your framework of your mind. Like when my kids were little, I would say, hey guys, did you eat your fruits and vegetables today? And did you guys get some protein in? And then after Blair died, that shifted to, did you eat today? And it didn't matter if it was cookies for the 100th time, or if it was chicken nuggets 17 days in a row. The point was, were they eating? And that became my thing too. Did I eat something? Did it matter if it was a well-balanced meal? No, was I eating anything? So I think your framework and your questions change for how you define success for your day.
Wow.
That's so good. I think when you can reevaluate, and as the saying goes, and I put this in my book, that a journey to 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I go on to explain, no one says how big that step is, or how many steps you have to, take to define that. So I think that when people are in their trauma or in something that in a deep grief, realizing that you get to decide what your progress looks like, but you have to decide you're making progress. And it's hard to do that when you're in the middle of, I can't breathe. So maybe that's not a day one accomplishment. It might be a few months into that, or maybe even a year into that. But to give yourself grace to be able to define what that looks like for you, kind of keeping the opinions of others here, because they're doing it out of loving hearts, most of them. But realizing that you don't have to do everything people tell you, and that you can adjust your sails, if you will, because we say that phrase a lot around here too. You just have to adjust your sails on. It didn't go the way you planned it. You got to adjust your sails and figure out how to move forward, and then being able to redefine what success looks like for you. It might not look like the same. I always say that the only thing that widows have in common is the fact that they lost their person, their situation, their jobs, their home life, their kids, their not kids, their work, their not work. All that's those pieces are different. I haven't found two people that look exactly alike. And, so in that, being able to go, it's okay that you don't have it all together. because you probably won't for a while. And even now, I don't know that I do. I just think we've just accumulated what are considered the next things and just finding your way in the dark.
I keep thinking I'm going to let you go, but I have another question for you because I'm just really curious how you dealt with this. When my wife passed away, I was a pastor, and people expect the pastor to be the strong one. And I really found that in that year after she passed, there wasn't so much people coming to console me, but I had to console others about her loss. Now, here you are at the head of this radio company with a lot of people who loved Blair deeply. Did you find yourself in the process of, rather than being consoled, having to console others?
Sometimes, I will say sometimes yes, but I wish that is one thing. If I could go back and do it differently, I wish I had been more available. I think then I was so pressed for, we live about an hour away from the office, and I had young kids in school, and I'm their only means of getting anywhere. So I think in the very beginning, everything was so pressed for time. I probably wish I could go back and actually have been there more. I can remember a few instances from individual staff members where sitting and listening to stories, and we spent a lot of time doing that in the beginning, and crying together. We did. And I think I grew closer with the staff, through that, obviously. I think the biggest thing is, we all wanted to keep doing a good job because that was honoring to Blair's memory. And I can say every single person that I worked with did that. I am so grateful for that time where if I said, hey, do you have any idea on how this can get done? And 9 times out of 10, or 99% of the time, it was, I'll take care of it. And I look back and go, wow, they were grieving as well. They lost a friend, a mentor. And how is this, how's this going to work? And I probably wish I had made more time for that. But to answer your question, yes, we did all have some moments where we were able to grieve together. There was a lot of uncertainty in the beginning about what was going to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen in the very beginning. I had my own, oh my goodness, what next? But right after he passed away on Thanksgiving, and remember in radio world, there's billing was Monday, and he always did billing. And I'll tell you a quick little funny story. He sat and did billing, and I always just saw him doing it, but he used 2 stamps. He used a Forever stamp, and then he used a Penguin stamp. And I always just thought that he bought the Penguin stamps because they were a fun version of Forever stamps. And so that night after his funeral, I felt like I was being dishonoring if I didn't get billing out, because I knew he was always by the book timeline. And I was upset that I couldn't have done it the Monday. I was already a day late, feeling like a failure. Like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I can't even get billing out on time. So I sat up after the night of his funeral and was working on billing, and I had put the stamps on and all those things and had it in a box. And I'm like, okay, I've got 20 minutes to drop this off at the post office before I have to leave to go pick up one of my kids. And so I take it up to the office, go to the post office, and I did the Forever stamps first, ran out of those, did the Penguin stamps. And then the lady gets the Penguin stamps, and she's looked at, she goes, oh, honey, she said, these are extra ounce stamps. These are not regular stamps. And I thought, now I can't even put a stamp on an envelope. I'm not going to make it. So she sat there and got leverage. She's like, okay, this one you owe 42 cents. This one you owe 17 cents. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make it. But those were just some initial moments of, I don't know. I just didn't know anything. All I knew was that was the next thing. I had to get billing out, and I had to wait in the line to redo the stamps. And don't ever buy Penguin stamps. They are not what you think.
Amen. Well, I have one final question for you, and that is, especially in a situation where young children are involved and a parent is lost, it becomes such an easy question for us to say, how can a God of love allow something like this to happen? What has been your discovery about that question?
Oh, that's a big question. I think people have been debating that one for years. I can only speak from my faith, and I just think that, there's always going to be health and sickness and free will. And that is a general answer to that question. A lot of life's things, especially in light of a lot of things that are happening now. Um, I, I will never understand some of those things. And I'm not sure my brain has the capacity to. In the beginning, I questioned a lot of that, like, oh, why did this happen? And those sorts of things. But my faith is such that I do believe in the verse that talks about that he only wants good things. And I didn't know what those were going to be. I still, we still don't obviously know all those things that God has for us, but I could only trust that he was going to make a way. And because I'd always had that faith in our other things in life, even before this moment, I'd always thought, okay, I don't know how we're going to get through these things. It's not like life was completely, rosy. That we had moments, with different things, with different people passing away, and just our own different things you go through in life. But how you're thinking, okay, I'm just going to keep following my faith and knowing that God doesn't want anything bad for me. And even though this is a terrible loss, and that I'm just going to hope that someday God is able to make it okay. And I just trusted in that, I guess, which is probably, I think, the only way that we can kind of move forward, and having that knowledge of, yeah, this is really terrible. I mean, I have friends with cancer diagnoses and things along those lines, sure, asking a lot of those same questions. And I don't think anybody has those answers. But the only thing I can do is know that, God's responsible for my salvation. And I'm just going to, my eyes have to be focused on that.
And I wasn't expecting to give this particular song a plug, but as you talked, I remembered one of the current songs that has just powerfully smacked me upside the head is called Kind by Corey Asbury. So if anybody is struggling with this question, I would encourage you to go and Google Kind by Corey Asbury, and it's one that just really speaks powerfully into this.
Yeah. And
Kelly, again.
I was just going to add on. I did create a website, kellytrask.com, and that does have the link to my book, as well as I started a blog there of people, just some quick little reads that people could access that, if they have questions, I don't mind if they want to send me an email, that's perfectly fine. That's all on there.
Awesome.
You can send a note. I am not a counselor. I'm a human. Just another person. I'd be like a friend. So I don't have any credentialing in that skill other than experience. And I'm still learning as we go. So, but that's a couple of places where you can get some additional thoughts if you would like them.
And people need that. That friend component is one of the most healing components, I think, in the grieving process.
I will say, I'm glad you brought that up. Right after Blair passed away, a friend I hadn't seen in 20 years, she and I went to school together. Her husband actually had just died the year prior, so she was a year and ahead. And she said, look, I know we haven't spoke in 20 years. She said, but you're going to need a 2 a.m. phone call because you don't sleep. I don't think I slept for 6 months or 8 really. But she said, you're going to need a 2 a.m. phone call. And she, out of the blue, she just gave me her number, and I had not talked to her before. And I've not really talked to her after, but I remember one night I called her and she answered. And she just let me vent, cry, talk. At the end, she kind of was quiet there, and she said, are you good? And are you good for now? And did you say all the things you were thinking? And I was kind of like, yeah, I think I have. And she's like, okay, you need me again. I'm here at 2 a.m. And I think it was just having that knowledge that somebody was going to be able to listen when I needed them to. She was a godsend. She was someone else. I think God just dropped in my, not because gosh, I'm sorry that she was for her circumstance, because, you wouldn't wish that on anybody. But so that everybody needs a 2 a.m. phone call. That's for sure.
That is so beautiful.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, we will include all this information in the show notes if anybody would like to check out more about Kelly. Again, the name of your book is?
It's called The Next Thing, Moving Forward Without a Map. It's available if you just want to search Kelly Trask on Amazon, or you can search the title, or you can go to kellytrask.com. There is a button that takes you right there.
All right. Well, Kelly, if you'll hang on just a moment, I'll talk with you in just a moment. But right now, thank you, folks, for checking out the Survival Guide. And again, all these connections will be made in the show notes. And also, if you have more questions about what we do at Survival Guide, you can contact us through CORBINFosterMedia.com. That's CORBINFosterMedia.com. And we would love to hear from you as well. Well, if you have a story, a survival story, go to CorbinFosterMedia.com and connect with us there, because we would love to help you tell your story. There's a lot of healing in the telling process, and we would love to be a part of that with you. Until the next time, I'm Greg Fish. Thank you so very much for coming along on the Survival Guide.